Now follows panel discussion. Our moderator has been contributing to the technology media in Ukraine and internationally since 2007, focusing on startups, internet business, education, and sharing economy. Since then, his stories appeared in TheNextWeb, the Kyiv Post, Venture Village, East-West Digital News, and others. A warm welcome to Andrii Degeler. And also, welcome on the stage, once again, Mr. Uwe Kubach, Mr. Bernd Heinrichs, Mr. Stylianos Mamagkakis, alongside Ms. Amy Puliafito, Director of Communications of Misfit Wearables, as well as Rob Kniaz, founding partner of the London-based Hoxton Ventures.
Ladies and gentlemen, and thank you everyone once again for great presentations today. So if we shall kick off our discussion, let's start with a simple question for every one of you. What do you think are the limitations of Internet of Everything? Do you think there is anything that could never possibly be connected? Let's start from Amy and then
Rob.
Amy, Rob, and then in any order.
I can go first.
Okay.
I think standardization is the real key for IoT. That everything I think over time will be connected. It'd be crazy not to have things connected. Even the dumbest devices probably have some utility in being connected. The question is, will there be enough standards to make it feasible for every device to connect to every other device via a common protocol or common standards?
And from a healthcare perspective, I mean, I think it's impossible to completely rule out the provider's role in an individual's health, but from Misfit's perspective, what we're really looking to do is provide data and insights that are valuable to people in their everyday lives. So giving them the tools to look at the three most important things to wellness, which we think are activity, sleep, and food. So, from a healthcare perspective, which is where our founding team is coming from, which is where I'm coming from, we think that there is a lot of potential in the Internet of Things, but there's always going to be a role for the provider as well.
From my perspective, I think it's about standards, yes, but open standards. That's a big difference. So I would definitely not go for a traditional standard, but for an open standard. Second point is I think we need to fix the data ownership topic, and especially also the safety and security issues, which are when you're talking to business customers, that is always the first thing which pops up.
So once again, what do you think could never be connected? Is there anything?
No, I talked, my view is that we can connect everything, including us.
So I would actually also like to say that in the end, everything can be connected, and it's a matter of cost. And indeed, what was started before in the conversation, standardization, is really key in respect with driving the cost down. And there, I'm also looking forward to open standards or standards driven by the industry biggest players. Unfortunately, what I see is that this standardization efforts go slower than what would be necessary. And what we see is that a lot of companies moving forwards and trying to create de facto standards by having their own integrated offerings.
Yeah, maybe I would also agree that technically the challenge is less significant than on the business side, right? I think technically you could even connect plants with humidity sensors and what have you. So but the question is, does it make sense from a business perspective, right? Is there any value? And that leads then to these questions of how much does it cost to connect the things? And their standardization is a big topic to bring the cost down. So definitely standards play an important role, but I would fully agree with the statement from the colleague from Cisco that I would not believe in traditional standards, that we now build standardization committees and discuss about standards for the next 5 years and then implement the standards. But I much more believe in open platforms and you have to be open to many standards, and you have to choose the right standard for the right scenario. And this is how I think you can much more quickly and much more pragmatically move forward. And then you will see the de facto standards being established and being adopted worldwide.
Yes, but in addition to standards, I guess what we also need for Internet of Everything is the infrastructure, which was mentioned a few times during the presentations. Does that actually necessarily mean that only the countries with the infrastructure in place can benefit from Internet of Everything? What's in there for developing countries, for emerging countries then?
Maybe from an infrastructure provider company, I can say there is the biggest chance really for countries which are maybe behind the top industrial countries really to like a greenfield type of situation where you can really build the infrastructure as it should be, right? And there are examples where we see at the moment when we look into where it's happening, the biggest really projects which we are doing in the business of the cities are happening in Middle East, they are happening in Africa and Eastern Europe in a lot of cases, right? And Western Europe is in a lot of cases falling behind. So I see even an advantage in a lot of cases for the underdeveloped countries.
So basically you mean that they have an opportunity to build infrastructure the way it should be, instead of modifying.
Yeah, I think that's the opportunity, is to come in later to an ecosystem and jump in with newer equipment. The same way with like 3G in a lot of developing markets is actually quite good. You go to Africa right now, and you'll probably get better 3G connections than you would in London by comparison. I always joke that in my house I get worse reception than Johannesburg. Just the way it is when you have new equipment deployed using newer standards. Often it works better for everyone. So there's a bit of a lag until it catches up, but over time it actually puts them in a better position.
And how about the healthcare perspective?
Yeah, I mean, for me, I think I see things from a consumer perspective a little bit more. Obviously, Misfit's a consumer company. I mean, I think that there's a lot of potential, but we have a really long way to go, especially as far as wearables are concerned. Right now in the US, we have somewhere around 1% market penetration, which is very, very, very early, obviously. So as far as just educating people around the potential of these technologies, explaining to them what they do, how our products track activity, how they track sleep, we're really still at the beginning. I think, you know, from an academic perspective, there's a lot that's being done in underserved communities, vulnerable communities in the US, as far as looking at things like the obesity epidemic and using wearable technology and smartphone technology to get a better handle on health behaviors and how to change them. So I think there's a lot of potential, but at least for me as a communications professional, I really feel like we have a very long way to go in just educating people to start off with for adoption.
So in respect with the infrastructure needed to drive IoT applications, so there, my opinion is that it is not a problem today to kickstart IoT applications, the infrastructure. It's not a bottleneck right now, but as it scales, and when we're talking about hundreds of millions and billions of devices, then yes, indeed, we will see infrastructure bottlenecks. And today we'll see actually mainly US companies investing in this type of infrastructure in the form of data centers. Now, lately, because of also of privacy concerns, because of data security concerns, we see also this to some extent reversing, and also a lot of localization in these data centers. So to begin, I do not expect a bottleneck such IoT, and then eventually I think that there will be an adaptation and also localization for the infrastructure to support it.
Yeah, I think we already see that mobile networks become really available globally. We have first projects with farmers in Africa, in developing countries, that they use mobile phones to do business. And this must not be the latest smartphone, but very basic feature phones that they use to do business. So I think this infrastructure in mobile already is used to overcome the digital divide and to have also these people access a global worldwide economy, and this is the same what we will see with the IoT infrastructure, right? And more or less we talk about the same network technologies, and I think it will even be more an overcome of the digital divide than maybe even building a bigger divide.
Can I add one point to the, because It was mentioned the mobile world. Definitely the mobile world is developing, but I think we should see scenarios, and I know scenarios. For example, going into a stadium where you want to offer services to about 80,000 people, you cannot and you will not do it with a mobile type of network in the future, so that everybody is happy. You need wireless, you need other technologies, which I think are basic need for the Internet of Things to make it real in specific scenarios.
Okay. While I have the microphone, Bernd, you made an interesting point during your presentation about apps versus web in Internet of Things. Could you please make it a bit further, and then we'll ask if everyone agrees with you?
So I see, I derive it for myself, and we discussed it with several startups in our innovation center. We discussed it internally at Cisco, that we believe the web, the omnipresent web of the future, which I believe in, will provide you with the services I need on my mobile device automatically. And I'm not downloading any app for that, right? Which is already partially available nowadays, right? If I go in specific stadiums, again to the stadium part, I'm not loading an application, but I'm automatically on the website and I'm getting the services through that. That is making my life easier. Maybe I'm too old for the apps, I don't know. But I get what I need out of the web, and the web knows what I need and gives it to me. And I'm looking forward to this world. And therefore I said apps are dead in the future, and the web of things will make it.
So I actually found very interesting your proclamation that applications are going to play less role. There perhaps you could also discuss actually seeing the exact opposite trend for the smartphones. So for smartphones, we saw that a very big part of the success of Apple and Android devices was exactly these applications. Can you perhaps extrapolate why you see a completely different trend while the business model seems to be similar? Or?
I'm not, okay, let me react once more. So I believe it is, if the user experience on the web is the same as with the applications, that is a prerequisite, then that is my conclusion, then it will take out the need for apps. Because it's there automatically, and it will push the smartphone, say it's in the same way as an app which is running on it, right? Because the web should serve you in the same way as the apps are doing. That is what I'm believing.
I think we have a little bit to differentiate between if we call about the system of records or the systems of engagement, right? If we talk more about the consumption side, the front end, then I would say yes, more and more I think will be just simple portals to some data that is stored in the cloud, and they have heavyweight applications maybe running in the cloud. You even mentioned the fog computing. There will be a lot of data processed. I think IDC predicts 40% of the IoT data to be processed locally. So I think local intelligence will have still a big role. Applications will add the value, because if you only collect data and you don't have an insight on application on top of that, that does not help. But the question is, where will this application be running? And I think, yes, it will be run already on the edge devices that the data is produced. It will be run on the analytics side in a cloud, and the consumption will be very, very lightweight at the end device. This might only be a portal in the future. I also think that an app, as we now download it from a Play Store or Apple Store, will not have that role anymore in 5 to 10 years from now. And we already see that. I think downloads of apps, as we think in the classical way of apps, are already significantly going down.
But how about smartwatches? Do you really think you will be entering a web URL on your wrist?
You know, you would never do that. When I'm talking about the web of things, it shouldn't be putting in a website, right? It should be automatically happen, right? I'm not searching for a website. I get it. I get access to it, right? And that is working now already if you do it right.
But doesn't it go into this infrastructural bottleneck at the end? Because an app can work locally and web works, well, in the internet, in the web. So you need the connectivity, you need the wider broadband and so on.
So I think what is important about all these variables is that they lead us a little bit further in this vision that Mark Weiser had back in the 90s, right, with his ubiquitous computing, that the systems, the hardware gets less and less important. but you interact with them via voice, for example, and these wearable watches, smartwatches are a direction of that, right? You don't interact anymore with your phone directly and you type in stuff, but maybe you only talk to your watch and say, okay, give me a phone call to my colleague, and all is done automatically. So the hardware gets less and less important and disappears more and more from the interaction with the end user.
I fully agree with that, and you know, I called it before the fog is playing a role in that. You can call it the fog web, or call it the distributed cloud, or whatever you call it, which is
sort of intranet.
It's not an intranet. It is a distributed internet, maybe, which is really giving you the service all where you are, but differentiating between local services and global services, but in a transparent way for you as a user, because you are not thinking about it. You get the service which you need where you are, at what time you want to use it, with what device, right? That is really the ultimate goal, which I believe will happen. And the Googles of the world and the companies sitting here, I think, are working on that.
As far as driving adoption from a wearables perspective, what we've really tried to do is make a wearable that is not invasive and at the very least and is fashionable and is something that people would really want to wear. And so for us, I think, you know, our app is has been a really important part of our product, not just because of what it does, but what it allows our wearable to actually be, which is something without a screen that can give you essential information at a glance, but not be invasive, not be ugly, be extremely comfortable. So, you know, up until this point, we've actually been completely, as far as our user interface and all of our social features and all of that, a completely app-based product. And for us, having those features on the app has allowed us to deliver a sort of more pared-down user experience as far as our hardware, which I think has ultimately driven adoption and driven engagement and, you know, wearability over time. So.
Yeah, not much to add to that. I think, you know, the app is where the innovation is really happening in a lot of cases, that over time, you know, the standards pass back to the web and pass back to the browser. So the things you see like WebRTC that people were doing 3 years ago in mobile apps are now, you know, built into the mobile browser, but it takes a lot of time for that to really trickle down. So I think, you know, the app is where the forefront of innovation happens, that people will try crazy things. Some of it will work, some of it won't. But over time, that'll, you know, eventually distill into standards that eventually get, you know, browser-based and become ubiquitous.
So do you, Bernd, think that the appless future for Internet of Things, does it still require a breakthrough in web programming, web development, front end, or is it possible already with the tools we have in place at the moment?
So in my view, it's possible already now. All the work we are doing, and join us and visit us in Berlin, you will see it, is towards that end of the solution, right? So we are not building applications, or maybe slightly different. We are working on applications, but move them directly into a web type of solution, as you described. It is much easier, and it's in a lot of cases also more understandable for people that they can own the app. It is more kind of that's mine than a web type of solution, right? Also for the companies who are developing apps, it is an easier to realize business model developing apps compared to a website, right? But I think if we break through that point, it will happen, and we do it, right? Because we believe in it.
Well, from our side, actually, being from Samsung Semiconductor, being able to see where the processing and memory, how globally it is distributed. Today, we can see that about 40% is on PC, 40% on mobile, around 20% in servers in the cloud. So indeed, we see that we will have cloud rising much more on the expense of PC. But then also mobile, if not staying the same, also growing. So in respect with computation and storage, and in the end, where you will have the processing and the applications taking place, where we with a dedicated application, or whether it will be through a browser or something that is running in the back office, we expect parallel growth, perhaps a little bit more on the cloud, because it is at a lower level today. But then we do not expect that for mobile it will stop. You will still have a lot of processing and data management done locally.
But even with the fog computing, even with so many data being stored and worked on locally with Internet of Things, the more devices we have connected, the more data we need to store, first of all. And this stored data is it basically means more power consumptions for data centers, which basically means more pollution and so on. What ways are there to reduce the data that we gather from Internet of Things devices?
So I think it depends on how useful the data are, but our experience is, if you look into specific applications which we are working on, I can, with a fog approach, because the fog in the first place is filtering the data, is checking the data and throwing away probably half of it, or maybe 20% to 80%. That is our experience depending on the application, right? Because only a fraction of the data is really usable. Even though it's produced for a specific reason, there is no need for all of the data. So we try really to reduce it. But on the other hand, this will be only helping for some time because the data will rise further on, right? But filtering is one of the key options we are doing in the fog, right? Before we get the data stored in the cloud or whatever, right?
As I mentioned previously, I think a lot of data will be pre-processed at the edge. I mentioned this 40% that IDC predicts. On the other hand, they also predict that 90% of the data will still hit the cloud at the end. So it will be stored somewhere in centralized infrastructures. But I think with the cloud and the flexibility that we gain through it, we even use the resources that we have in the cloud more efficiently, right? It's not that any company has its own data center and most of the CPUs cycle maybe most part of the night, but the same CPUs in a cloud infrastructure are used from a different point in the world, from a different time zone. So I think with the cloud, we even gain some more efficiency. Of course, with more and more data being produced, we have to use more and more energy to process this data. But with the infrastructures we had, we do this already in a very efficient way, I think. And also don't forget that we use all this data to optimize processes to bring cost and energy consumption down. So I think they are in manufacturing. When you know how you produce, where you waste energy, you can bring energy consumption significantly down with these technologies, right? I'm not sure if everybody ever calculated a trade-off between how much we invest in new data centers and the energy consumption there, and what we save with using these new technologies.
So I would also like to say that actually there is no free lunch. More data will eventually mean more power consumption. But what I would like to assure everybody is that all the companies in the value chain are taking this extremely seriously, both because of their own profits, so the data centers having as a major key performance indicator the power they consume, but then as well as also on the devices because they have a specific power budget and people don't want to recharge their stuff twice per day. So everybody is taking this very seriously, and actually this is also why today all these different tiers of computation and data storage do exist, because companies do take seriously and do it the most extreme efficient way possible today.
Can I add one more point? I talked about throwing away data, but there is a lot of data, and again, coming back to what we heard from SAP, and there are several examples where you really do an on-the-fly, real-time analysis of the data, and you don't store the data at all, right? You do it on the fly, and so there is no store, analyze, acting. It is analyzing, acting, and storing the rest, which is a minority of the data in a lot of cases, and that is going to happen, right?
Yeah. Amy, Rob, how do you do with the data, and do you try to minimize the amounts that you store?
I think his point was spot on. I mean, you do pre-filtering at the edge, and in general, in comparison to the storage of video and audio and various different things, IoT is a drop in the bucket. Like, pre-processed sensor data is such a small percentage of the overall growth in things like video that I don't think it's a rounding error at this point compared to the bigger problems in storage of Hall.
Yeah, for me, this is like a truly original question. No one has asked me this question before. I mean, for us, we're actually really concerned about, making sure people keep their device and use them over a long period of time. driving adoption and long-term engagement is a big concern of ours. And so a big part of that is making a device that's durable, that people are going to keep wearing. That as far as, you know, being conscientious of waste, that's our primary concern as a company. So, I mean, I guess I couldn't really agree more with his last point. So
store more.
Yeah, I mean, for in Silicon Valley, the question is how do we get more, but also what do you want to know? And I think that's sort of the biggest question. It's like with all the data that you collect, if you could do something with it, what would you want to do with it? That is the question that I think really keeps people up at night.
Another question for the consumer's perspective would be the privacy concerns, which have been arousing for quite a while around Internet of Things. So how do you address it, and how do you work with it?
Yeah, I mean, for us, it's interesting because it's interesting for me to come to Europe because I think actually the European consumer generally tends to be more educated around privacy concerns and more thoughtful around privacy. For us, we actually collect very limited data, so that's really how we start. I mean, for us, we have a pretty pared-down feature set very intentionally because, you know, even though there's a lot of engineers in Silicon Valley that can build, you know, really fancy wearables that can give you a lot of information, what we found is that most people just really want to have an overall view, overall insights into their daily activity and well-being. So for us, we've started really, you know, addressing those concerns by not providing unnecessary features or collecting unnecessary data, and also just communicating very openly with our community about, you know what we do collect and what we don't. So that's really where it starts.
Maybe one comment, it's not my personal one, but it's from Fraunhofer, which is really a well-known research company in the world and doing a lot in cybersecurity and security, safety and privacy. And it was interesting really being at a conference and talking to their chief guy there, and he was saying, you know, it was in Germany, and Germany is especially a lot of focus on the privacy, so we know that. But he said, forget about that, you know. Talk to these guys sitting in front of you. They don't bother about security. I don't agree in total, but he was really saying, this is not the biggest problem we have, right? We have much bigger problems than the privacy and security issue. The young generation is already opening themselves in a lot of means, and that goes even further than we can imagine at the moment in the near future. That was his statement. And I think there is some truth in it, right?
So what you're implying is that there's going to be no privacy at some point.
It's in the middle. I think we need to find it's a fine balance which we need to find, right? What's the right level of security is.
I think what is very important with data privacy is security, that you can ensure that only those people have access to the data that is collected somewhere who are authorized to do so. And there, I like this comparison to, okay, who do you trust to save your money, right? Do you put it in your stockings under your cushion in the home, or do you trust a bank who is professional in storing or saving money in a trésor, in a safe? So security is key, and the other thing that is also important for data privacy is transparency. So I think the end user has to be very well educated about what application or what service is using which of the data that he or she is producing. And if you get this transparency and you will have an option to opt in and say, okay, I see a certain value for me about sharing my data or offering my data because I get a service that I need. So everybody for us, I think, is willing to share his location in the navigation system in the car because it brings you to your target, right? So I have a value out of that. And if that value balances out the data that I give away, then it's a value for me. That's a business case for me, and so I do it. But I need this transparency and I need the security.
I think you have to really strike a balance too, right? I mean, having all this data is great. You know, be sensible with how you store it. But frankly, the world's an insecure place. I'm far more worried about someone going in my post box and stealing my bank statement from my post box. That's much more likely to happen than someone hacking all my IoT devices and getting my sensor data. I'm more worried about someone actually breaking into my doctor's office and going to his file room, because guess what? It's a wooden door you could probably punch through with a hard punch. That's a lot less secure than the basic, even standard encryption and standard protections most people that hold data are taking these days. So yeah, there's a risk everywhere of your data getting taken or misused, but there are probably analogs that are even less secure